mid to late 50s, 56, 57. Tony Blair, 69, currently talking about a return to politics. Heavens above, if you're an American presidential contender, you're probably in your 70s. We may see more of Boris in the future.
Indeed. I mean, this is a man who's had an eclectic past as a journalist and as a politician. You know, he is someone who has sustained a very, very successful political career over the last decade or so. We have to remember, I mean, you know, he resigned from the shadow cabinets way back in the day under Michael Howard. Must be said, because he told some untruths, and yet he managed to rebuild his political career, become Mayor of London, become Foreign Secretary, and then Prime Minister. As you say, he's still a pretty young man. There is no doubt that this will not be the end of Boris Johnson. Just in terms of also the logistics, if he does, and it is a big if, he was to go today, clearly, we think, at least anyway, he would remain as Prime Minister while there was a leadership contest. So he would remain in Downing Street, we suspect, for at least another couple of months, just in terms of that transition. Just to bring you up to date what's happening here, as you just seen in the last couple of minutes, Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, has just walked in. Interestingly, me and a couple of other journalists were shouting questions at her. She did. She made it very clear that she's sticking by the Prime Minister. She is not going in there to tell him to resign. When I asked whether his position was sustainable, yes, she said it was sustainable. She's clearly not one of those people now urging Boris Johnson to go. Interestingly, though, in the last couple of minutes also, to add to that and to balance it slightly out, we believe that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is now calling for the Prime Minister to go. We know that she is inside. We know that Nadine Zahawi is inside. We know that the World Secretary, Simon Hart, is inside. The International Trade Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, is inside. We know Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, is inside. We know that Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, who's in Belfast, is frantically trying to get back to London, but we believe his plane is delayed. But on the whole, most of those figures inside number 10 are frankly telling the Prime Minister that the game is up. It's what he does next, whether he accepts that or whether he is absolutely determined to fight on. But it seems that the mood inside number 10, perhaps unsurprisingly, and we have to say politics is a brutal sport, we are talking about people's lives here, talking about people's jobs, and not just the politicians that you and I and everyone else knows. We're talking about their members of staff and the people who work behind the scenes for Boris Johnson in Downing Street. We believe, as I said, they're quite upset about the events of today. I think the big question is, and I've said this all day, and I don't think it's anything new, it's not now a matter of if the Prime Minister will go, it's almost certainly a question of when. It's how things play out in the next couple of hours. Will those threats of cabinet resignation, those, as you say, the men and women in grey suits now are frankly saying it is over, will that be enough to push Boris Johnson to resign? Or will he determine to carry on, even with those resignations, and where will that then lead us?
And Darren, as you tell it, it's fascinating, particularly Priti Patel may be arguing for the Prime Minister to go, but actually, as with the resignation of Margaret Thatcher, not everybody filing through that door is saying, Prime Minister, it's time to go. As you suggest, it's hard to imagine Nadine Dorries has gone in there and said, Prime Minister, it's time. Far more likely, she said, actually, hang on, Prime Minister. So it could be conflicting advice, couldn't it, for all we know. Darren,